In a quiet corner of a small American town, there was a little laundry shop wedged between a closed diner and an old hardware store that had seen better days. The neon sign above the door flickered faintly at night, but inside, the place always smelled like fresh soap, warm steam, and the faint comfort of clean clothes. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't busy in the way big city places were, but it stayed alive because of one person. Her name was Elena Parker. Elena was the kind of person most people noticed without really seeing. She worked behind the counter from early morning until late evening, folding clothes with quiet precision, organizing bundles, checking tags, and helping customers who rarely looked her in the eye. She wore a simple blue apron over plain clothes. Her hair usually tied back in a loose ponytail, a few strands always escaping as the day went on. To the town, she was just the laundry girl. People came in, dropped off their clothes, gave short instructions, and left just as quickly. Some barely said thank you. Others spoke as if she were invisible. A few even made careless jokes about how that's all she'd ever do. Elena never responded. She just smiled politely, nodded, and kept working. But behind her calm expression, there was a world people didn't understand. Elena wasn't lazy. She wasn't stuck because she lacked ambition. She was there because life had narrowed her choices early. Her parents had passed away when she was young, leaving her with responsibilities she never complained about. College had once been a dream, but bills and survival came first. So she built a life out of what she had: steady work, small routines, and quiet resilience. Still, she never let bitterness take root. Every morning she arrived before sunrise. She would unlock the shop, switch on the soft humming machines, and open the windows just enough to let in fresh air. There was something peaceful about those first hours, when the town was still half asleep and the world hadn't yet decided how harsh it would be. Elena had a habit of noticing small things others ignored. She noticed when an elderly customer's hands shook too much to carry laundry bags and would quietly help them to their car. She noticed when a college student looked exhausted and would slip in an extra folded towel without mentioning it. She noticed when children peeked through the glass door, fascinated by the spinning machines, and would smile back at them to make them feel welcome. To her, kindness wasn't something dramatic. It was just part of the job of being human. But not everyone saw it that way. In the town's eyes, Elena was ordinary. Worse than ordinary, she was overlooked. People talked about ambition, success, and getting out of here as if staying behind meant failure. They assumed she had no bigger dreams because she didn't speak about them loudly. What they didn't know was that Elena did dream. She just kept them private. Sometimes, late at night after closing the shop, she would sit by the counter with a notebook. She wrote ideas she never told anyone: small business concepts, plans for something better, sketches of a future she wasn't sure she could reach yet. But she kept writing anyway. It made her feel like she still had a direction, even if it was slow. Her life might have looked simple from the outside, but inside she carried something steady and unshaken: dignity. Still, loneliness had a way of creeping in. There were moments when she would glance at couples walking past the shop window, laughing together, or families going out for dinner, and she would wonder what it would feel like to be seen, not just as a worker, but as someone worth choosing, worth knowing deeply. She never said this out loud. She didn't even fully admit it to herself. One evening, as the sky turned soft orange and the last customers left, Elena stood behind the counter counting the day's receipts. The machines hummed in the background like a calm heartbeat. She paused for a moment, looking at the empty chairs, the folded stacks of clean clothes waiting for pickup, and the fading light outside the window. It was another ordinary day, or at least it seemed that way. She didn't know it yet, but something was about to enter her life, something that would challenge everything the town believed about her, and everything she believed about herself. And it would begin with a man who didn't look at her the way everyone else did. The next morning began like every other morning for Elena Parker: quiet, predictable, and slightly rushed. The laundry shop's machines were already humming. warm steam drifting through the back room as she sorted freshly washed clothes into neat piles. Outside, the small town was waking up slowly, cars passing by with no particular urgency, people heading to jobs they probably didn't love but had learned to accept. Elena didn't think much about who would walk through her door that day. Most customers were familiar faces, regulars who came in every week, said the same greetings, and left the same way. Life in the shop rarely surprised her. But that was? Before he arrived, a black car pulled up outside the laundromat, something unusual for this part of town. It was clean, expensive-looking, and out of place against the faded storefronts and dusty sidewalks. A few passers-by noticed it, slowing down with curiosity. The door opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't dressed like the locals. His coat was tailored, his shoes polished, and his presence carried a quiet confidence that didn't need attention but naturally drew it. He looked like someone who belonged in a glass tower office, not a small-town laundry shop with flickering lights. His name was Daniel Whitmore. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't glance around like someone lost or uncomfortable. Instead, he observed carefully, as if he was noticing things most people missed: the rhythm of the shop, the softness of the machines, the way Elena moved behind the counter with steady focus. When he walked in, the small bell above the door rang softly. Elena looked up immediately. "Good morning," she said politely, her tone calm and professional. "Morning," Daniel replied. Most customers didn't stand out to her, but something about him did. Maybe it was the way he didn't immediately pull out his phone. Maybe it was how he actually looked at the space instead of treating it like a quick stop. "I need these cleaned," he said, placing a garment bag on the counter. Elena nodded and began checking the items. Expensive fabric, high-quality stitching. Definitely not something she saw every day in her shop. "This will take about 2 days," she said. "That's fine," he replied simply. There was a pause, not awkward but intentional, like neither of them felt the need to rush away from the moment. Daniel's eyes shifted slightly, not toward the machines or the clothes, but toward Elena herself. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that felt observant, thoughtful. "You've been working here long?" he asked. Elena hesitated for half a second. Most customers didn't ask questions like that. "Long enough," she said with a small, polite smile. He nodded, as if accepting that answer, though his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied with how little it revealed. Over the next few minutes, as Elena processed the order, Daniel stayed nearby instead of leaving immediately. He leaned slightly against the counter, watching not in judgment but in curiosity. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Yes," Elena replied. "It's small, not much to manage." Daniel glanced around again. "It looks like a lot of work for one person." "It keeps me busy," she said simply. "Busy, safe, controlled." That's how she usually described her life when people asked. But Daniel didn't respond the way others did. He didn't dismiss her job or treat it like something insignificant. Instead, he seemed to actually consider her words. That was new. A few moments passed in silence, filled only by the sound of machines spinning clothes clean. Then something small happened. An elderly man entered the shop, struggling with a heavy laundry basket. Elena immediately stepped out from behind the counter to help him without being asked. She lifted the basket carefully, spoke kindly to him, and guided him to a chair while she checked his order. It was a simple act, one she had done many times before, but Daniel watched it closely. When she returned to the counter, he wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't distracted. He was still watching her. "You do that often?" he asked. "Help people?" Elena said softly, shrugging a little. "It's not a big deal." To her, it wasn't, but to him it seemed like something else entirely. Something rare. Daniel collected his receipt and paused before leaving. "I'll be back in 2 days," he said. "I'll have it ready," Elena replied. He turned toward the door but stopped for a brief moment, as if thinking about saying something more. Then he simply nodded and left. The bell above the door rang again as he stepped out. Elena went back to her work, unaware that something about that brief interaction had stayed with him longer than expected. Outside, Daniel stood near his car for a moment, looking back at the small laundromat. To everyone else, it was just a building. But to him, it felt like the beginning of something he hadn't been searching for but had somehow found anyway. 2 days passed quietly in the small town the way most days did, without drama, without change, and without anything that hinted at what was coming. Elena Parker continued her routine at the laundromat, arriving early, opening the shop, and listening to the steady rhythm of machines that never complained, never rushed, never judged. But something subtle had shifted in her thoughts. She didn't know why, but she found herself remembering the man from the black car, Daniel Whitmore. It wasn't because he was wealthy or stood out in appearance. It was something quieter than that. It was the way he had looked at her work, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with genuine attention. That was unusual enough to stay in her mind longer than she expected. Still, she brushed it off. People came and went. Life didn't change, because of a few polite conversations. On the third afternoon, the bell above the laundromat door rang again. Elena looked up. And there he was. Daniel stood at the entrance, the same calm expression on his face, holding a small garment bag in his hand. He wasn't in a hurry. He never seemed to be. "I'm here for my order," he said. "It's ready," Elena replied, reaching behind the counter. As she handed him the neatly packaged clothing, their fingers briefly brushed the edge of the bag. A small, ordinary moment, but Daniel didn't leave immediately like most customers would. Instead, he stayed. "I have a question," he said. Elena tilted her head slightly. "Sure." He hesitated for a second, as if choosing his words carefully. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" The question caught her off guard. Not because it was rude, but because it was too direct. Most people assumed they already knew. Her answer without asking. Elena gave a soft, polite smile. "Something else like what?" Daniel glanced around the shop. "Anything, bigger, different, something that's yours." She lowered her gaze for a moment, smoothing a folded towel on the counter. "I think about a lot of things," she said carefully. "But thinking and changing are two different things." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she said out loud. Before she could add anything else, the door opened again. An elderly woman walked in carrying a heavy basket, struggling slightly with the weight. Elena immediately stepped forward. "I've got it, Mrs. Collins," she said warmly, taking the basket from her hands. "Oh, thank you, dear," the woman replied with relief. Elena carried it behind the counter, checking the tag and placing it where it belonged. Daniel watched the interaction closely again, his expression unreadable but focused. As the woman left to sit in the waiting chair, she accidentally dropped a folded receipt from her purse. It slid under the counter where it was difficult to see. Without thinking, Elena noticed. She bent down, picked it up, and handed it back to her with a smile. "You dropped this." "Oh my, I didn't even realize," the woman said, grateful. "You're always so kind, Elena." "It's nothing," Elena replied softly. But Daniel didn't treat it as nothing. He watched everything, the way Elena moved without hesitation, the way she noticed details others missed, the way she treated people with quiet respect even when no one was watching. There was something steady about her, something unforced. Not performed, not for show. When the shop grew quieter again, Daniel finally spoke. "You didn't have to do any of that," he said. Elena looked at him. "It's just helping." "That's exactly my point," he replied. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I don't understand." Daniel took a breath, as if forming a thought he had been carrying for a while. "Most people only help when there's something in it for them," he said. "Attention, approval, something returned." "But you don't?" Elena shrugged lightly. "It doesn't feel like a calculation. It's just, people need help sometimes." There was a brief silence between them again, but this time it felt different, heavier, more meaningful. Daniel looked at her like he was seeing something. Deeper than the small laundromat counter, deeper than her uniform, deeper than the assumptions the town had built around her. "I'll be back again," he said after a moment. "You always say that?" Elena replied with a faint smile. This time, Daniel didn't smile back immediately. Instead, he held her gaze for a second longer than usual. Yes, he said quietly, I do. Then he left. The bell above the door rang once more. Elena returned to her work, unaware that Daniel's thoughts were no longer about laundry or business or passing through town. They were about her. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Whitmore wasn't just observing a place. He was starting to feel like he had found something he didn't know he was searching for. By the end of the week, Elena Parker's routine had settled back into its usual rhythm. The laundromat hummed steadily, clothes spun in endless cycles, and the small town outside carried on with its familiar indifference. Nothing on the surface suggested change, but Daniel Whitmore kept returning. At first, it was easy to dismiss, just a man picking up clothes, asking simple questions, leaving politely. But soon his visits became more frequent and less about laundry. Sometimes he would arrive without urgency, stay longer than necessary, and ask Elena small, thoughtful questions about her work, her town, or even her opinions on things she never expected anyone like him to care about. And slowly, people started noticing. Small towns have a way of noticing everything. It began with whispers outside the shop. That's him again, someone muttered one afternoon as Daniel stepped out of his black car. Why does a man like that keep coming here? Another voice asked. Elena didn't hear all of it directly, but she felt the shift. The way customers looked at her differently when Daniel was around. The way conversations paused when she walked past. The way curiosity slowly turned into judgment. One afternoon, as Elena was organizing freshly cleaned clothes, she heard two women near the front counter speaking just loudly enough to be heard. She's just the laundry girl, one said with a faint laugh. People like him don't stay interested in people like her? The other chuckled softly. Maybe it's just a phase. He'll get bored. Elena kept her head down, folding fabric carefully, her expression steady. She had learned a long time ago how to let words pass through her without breaking her focus. But this time, something felt different, because Daniel was standing just a few feet away. He had walked in quietly, as he often did, but this time he had paused at the door instead of approaching the counter immediately. He had heard them, and he didn't look away. For a moment there was silence in the shop except for the sound of machines. The two women noticed him too, suddenly aware of what they had said. One of them gave an awkward smile and quickly turned away. Daniel finally walked to the counter, his expression calm, but something in his eyes had changed. Not anger, not frustration, something deeper, focused. Good afternoon, Elena said gently, as if nothing had happened. Daniel nodded, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. After a few seconds, he spoke quietly. Do people always talk like that here? Elena paused for just a beat. Talk like what? He glanced briefly toward the door where the women had exited. Like you're less than you are. Elena exhaled softly, as if she had heard similar things too many times to count. It's a small town, she said. People talk. It doesn't mean much. But Daniel didn't accept that answer so easily. It means more than you think, he replied. There was a quiet tension between them, not uncomfortable, but meaningful. Like something unspoken was forming beneath the surface. Before Elena could respond, an older man entered the shop carrying a newspaper under his arm. He glanced at Daniel, then at Elena, then shook his head slightly as if amused by something. Didn't expect to see you here again, the man said to Daniel. Daniel gave a polite nod. I like the service, the man chuckled. Service? Or something else? He didn't wait for an answer before walking away, but the implication lingered in the air. Elena felt it immediately, the weight of assumptions forming around her life, around Daniel's presence, around something she herself didn't fully understand yet. But Daniel didn't seem bothered. Instead, he turned slightly toward her. You ignore it, he said quietly. I've had practice, Elena replied. That doesn't make it right, he said. She looked up at him then, meeting his eyes directly. It's not about right or wrong, it's just reality. Daniel studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand how someone could speak so calmly about being underestimated. Then he said something unexpected. I don't think you see yourself the way I see you. Elena gave a small, uncertain smile. And how do you see me? He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know, but because he seemed careful about saying it out loud. Instead, he simply said, not. The way they do. The moment lingered between them. Outside, the town continued its quiet judgment. Inside, something else was beginning to form, something quieter than gossip, but far more powerful. And for the first time, Elena started to wonder if Daniel's visits weren't just coincidence, but purpose. The days that followed felt different for Elena Parker, even if nothing on the surface had truly changed. The laundromat still smelled of detergent and warm steam. The machines still hummed their steady rhythm, and the town still moved at its slow, familiar pace, but Daniel Whitmore kept returning. And the way he looked at her had changed. It was no longer just observation or curiosity. It was something more intentional, more grounded, as if he had made a quiet decision about something he wasn't ready to announce yet. Elena noticed, even if she didn't fully understand it. That afternoon, the sky outside was pale and soft, clouds drifting lazily over the small town. Elena was behind the counter, folding a stack of towels when Daniel walked in again, though no black car this time. He had arrived on foot. That alone made her pause. "Hi," she said, looking up. "Hi," he replied. There was a calmness in his voice, but also something unusual, like he wasn't here for laundry today. He didn't immediately place anything on the counter. Instead, he stood there for a moment, as if organizing his thoughts. "I'd like to talk to you," he said finally. Elena blinked slightly. "About your order?" "No," he said gently, "about you." That made her pause fully. Most conversations in her life were transactional: orders, payments, schedules. Rarely did someone come into her space wanting to talk about her as a person. She stepped slightly to the side of the counter. "Okay." Daniel looked around the shop for a moment, as if making sure they had enough privacy even though it was nearly empty. Then he spoke. "I've been coming here more often than I need to," he admitted. Elena gave a faint, polite smile. "I noticed." A small silence followed. "I didn't plan it," he continued. "At first it was just business, but that changed." Elena leaned slightly on the counter, listening. Daniel's voice stayed steady, but there was something honest in it now, something less guarded than before. "I've met a lot of people in my life," he said. "People who are interested in status, money, what they can gain. I got used to it." He paused briefly. "But you're not like that." Elena shook her head slightly. "I'm just doing my job." "That's exactly what I mean," he replied. "The way he said it made her look up again. Daniel continued, his tone quieter now. "You don't try to impress anyone. You don't pretend. You don't measure people by what they have." Elena felt slightly uncomfortable, not because of what he said, but because she wasn't used to being seen so clearly. "I don't think I'm anything special," she said softly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer to the counter. "That's the part you don't understand," he said. A long pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Elena looked at it, confused. "What's that?" Daniel placed it gently on the counter, but didn't push it toward her. "It's not money," he said before she could assume anything. She exhaled slightly, unsure what to expect. He continued, "I want to be honest with you." Elena's heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from uncertainty. Daniel looked directly at her now. "I want to marry you." The words didn't come dramatically. There was no raised voice, no theatrical moment, just calm certainty. For a second, Elena didn't react at all. Then she blinked, once, twice. "I'm sorry." "What?" she said quietly. Daniel didn't move. "I want to marry you," he repeated. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Elena looked down at the counter, trying to process what she had just heard. It didn't make sense, not in the world she knew. Men like him didn't make proposals like this, not in laundry shops. Not to women like her, at least according to everything she had been taught by life and the town around her. "This isn't funny," she said gently, almost as a reflex. "It's not a joke," he replied. She looked up at him again, searching his face for signs of amusement, pressure, or manipulation, but there were none, only sincerity. Why? She asked quietly. That question seemed to matter more to her than the proposal itself. Daniel took a slow breath. Because I don't want a life built on appearances, he said. I want something real. Elena didn't answer right away. Her mind was spinning, not with excitement, but with disbelief. Outside, the world continued as usual. A car passed. A bell rang from a distant shop. Life didn't pause for moments like this, but inside the laundromat, everything had shifted, and Elena Parker, the girl everyone in town overlooked, was now standing at the center of a decision she never imagined she would have to face. The proposal didn't leave Elena Parker's mind, not for a single moment, even after Daniel Whitmore walked out of the laundromat that day, even after the machines returned to their steady rhythm and customers came and went like nothing had changed. Elena felt as if her world had tilted slightly off balance. A marriage proposal wasn't supposed to feel like a quiet shock that followed you into every task, every conversation, every breath, but this one did. She didn't say yes, not immediately. She didn't say no either. Instead, she stayed suspended in something unfamiliar, uncertainty mixed with disbelief. That evening, as she locked up the laundromat, the sky had turned a deep blue, streetlights flickering on one by one. The town was quiet, but her thoughts were louder than ever. Daniel's words kept repeating in her mind. I want something real. What did that even mean, and why her? Over the next few days, Daniel returned, but not as a customer anymore. He didn't bring laundry. He didn't ask about services. He simply showed up and stood near the counter like someone waiting for an answer that hadn't been spoken yet. Elena tried to act normal, but it was impossible to ignore the shift. People in town noticed too. Whispers grew louder. He's serious. About her, that laundry girl? It won't last. Elena felt those words like small weights pressing on her shoulders whenever she stepped outside the shop. Even when no one spoke directly to her, she could feel the judgment in their glances. But Daniel didn't seem affected by any of it. If anything, he seemed more certain. One afternoon, he arrived while Elena was cleaning the folding tables. You've been quiet, he said gently. Elena didn't look up right away. I'm thinking. About what I said, he replied. Yes, she admitted. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he expected nothing less. There was a pause between them, comfortable but loaded. Finally, Elena spoke. This doesn't make sense, she said softly. People don't just decide something like that? I did, Daniel replied. That's not an explanation, she said, a hint of frustration breaking through her calm. He didn't argue. He simply stepped closer to the counter. You think this is sudden, he said. But it isn't, not for me. Elena finally looked up. What do you mean? Daniel hesitated for the first time. Then he spoke carefully. I've been watching how people treat you, he said. How they underestimate you. How they assume things about your life without asking who you are. Elena's expression tightened. Slightly. That's just how people are. No, Daniel said firmly, but not harshly. That's how careless people are. Silence settled between them again. Elena leaned against the counter, unsure how to respond. I don't need someone to rescue me from my life, she said quietly. I'm not trying to rescue you, he replied immediately. Then what are you trying to do? She asked. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. I'm trying to choose something honest, he said. That word choose stayed with her. Not save. Not fix. Not change. Choose. Days passed, and the town's curiosity turned into full-blown speculation. Every time Daniel's car appeared, people watched. Every time he spoke to Elena, people analyzed it like it was a story they were entitled to interpret. Elena felt trapped between two worlds, one where she had always lived quietly, and one she didn't understand yet. At home that night, she sat by her small kitchen table, staring at nothing. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest. Her life had always been simple. Work, survive, continue. But now something unfamiliar had entered that simplicity and refused to leave. The next day, Daniel didn't bring up the proposal immediately. Instead, he helped her carry a stack of delivered laundry inside when a sudden gust of wind knocked over a cart outside the shop. It was a small thing, practical, human. No pressure. No speeches. Just presence. When they were done, he stood by the door for a moment before speaking. I don't expect an answer today, he said. Elena nodded slightly. But I do need you to know something, he added. She looked at him. This isn't about the town, he said, or what people think. It never was. Elena studied his face, searching for something hidden beneath his calm expression, but all she found was patience, and something deeper, loneliness, maybe or understanding. I just need time, she finally said. Daniel nodded once. I can wait, he replied simply, and for the first time since the proposal, Elena believed him. But what she didn't know yet, what she couldn't know, was that Daniel Whitmore's reasons were still deeper than he had revealed, and the truth behind them was still waiting to surface. Elena Parker thought she understood silence. She lived with it every day, the quiet hum of machines, the soft rustle of folded clothes, the unspoken judgments of a small town that rarely said anything kind out loud. But Daniel Whitmore's silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was holding something back. And that realization followed Elena even when he wasn't around. Days had passed since his last visit, and the laundromat felt both normal and strange at the same time. Customers still came and went, but Elena found herself listening for the bell at the door a little more often than she cared to admit. When Daniel finally returned, it wasn't with his usual calm entrance. He stood outside for a moment longer than usual, looking through the glass as if preparing himself for something important. Then he stepped in. No smile, no casual greeting. Just intention? Can we talk? He asked. Elena nodded slowly. Of course. She noticed immediately that this time he didn't go near the counter. Instead, he stayed where he was, as if the conversation itself required distance. Elena stepped out from behind the counter. Is everything okay? She asked. Daniel exhaled lightly. I should have told you something earlier. That line alone made her stomach tighten slightly. What is it? She asked carefully. He looked at her, not like a stranger anymore, not like a customer, but like someone carrying a weight he could no longer keep alone. I didn't come to this town by accident, he said. Elena stayed quiet. Daniel continued. I built my company from nothing, he said. Over the years, I learned something. People don't always show you who they really are when there's money involved. He paused, as if choosing not to go too far too quickly. I was engaged once, he admitted. Elena's expression shifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. It didn't end well, he said quietly. Not because of distance or timing. Because I realized I wasn't loved for who I was. I was valued for what I had. The room felt still. Even the machines seemed distant in that moment. Daniel continued, his voice steady but softer now. After that, I stopped trusting quick connections. I stopped trusting people who were impressed too easily. Elena listened carefully, sensing this wasn't just history, it was the reason behind everything. I started traveling more quietly, he said, observing, living without attention. I wanted to understand what life looked like when nobody was performing for anyone else. He looked at her then. That's when I found this town. Elena's breath slowed slightly. And me? Daniel nodded once. Yes. There was no hesitation in his voice. I didn't plan to feel anything, he said. I didn't come here looking for someone. But I noticed you because you were the only person who didn't seem to be trying to become someone else. Elena lowered her gaze slightly. I'm just working, she said softly. That's not what I saw, Daniel replied. She looked up again. What did you see? She asked. Daniel took a slow breath, like he had finally reached the part he had been avoiding. I saw someone who gives without calculating, he said. Someone who treats kindness like it's normal, even when no one returns it. He paused. And I saw how people treat you like you're invisible, and you still show up every day. Elena didn't respond immediately. The words landed too deeply to answer quickly. Daniel continued, quieter now. I didn't come here to change your life, he said. I came here because for the first time in a long time I felt something I couldn't ignore. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. And that something is me? Daniel didn't rush his answer. Yes, he said simply. A long silence followed. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with understanding. Elena turned slightly, looking toward the rows of folded clothes, the steady machines, the life she had built carefully and quietly. "I don't know what you think you see in me," she said finally. Daniel stepped a little closer, not invading her space, just closing the emotional distance between them. "I see the truth," he said. Elena looked back at him. "And the truth is," he continued, "I don't want a life where I have to guess if someone is real." His voice softened. "I want a life where I already know." For the first time, Elena didn't feel like she was being pulled into something uncertain. She felt like she was being seen completely, without decoration, without expectation. But understanding didn't make the decision easier, it only made it real. And as Daniel stood quietly in front of her, Elena realized something she hadn't expected. This wasn't just about a proposal anymore. It was about whether she was ready to believe that someone could truly choose her not for what she had, but for who she was. The laundromat felt different that morning, even though nothing physical had changed. The machines still hummed, the folding tables were still neatly arranged, and the soft smell of detergent still filled the air. But for Elena Parker, everything inside her felt like it was standing at the edge of something new. Daniel Whitmore's words from the previous day hadn't left her mind. "I want a life where I already know." She kept replaying them, not as a romantic idea, but as a question she didn't yet know how to answer. For the first time, her life didn't feel like something she was simply surviving. It felt like something she might actually choose. That afternoon, Daniel returned again, but this time there was no tension in his presence, no urgency, no pressure. Just patience. He stood near the entrance for a moment, watching her as she worked before walking in. Elena looked up and gave a small nod. "Hi, hi," he replied gently. There was a calmness between them now that hadn't existed before. Not because everything was decided, but because something honest had already been spoken. Daniel didn't immediately bring up the proposal. Instead, he walked over to the counter and placed a small paper bag down. "What's this?" Elena asked. "Lunch," he said simply. She blinked slightly. "You brought me lunch?" "I noticed you don't always take breaks," he replied. Elena gave a faint, almost surprised smile. "That's not necessary." "I know," Daniel said. "But it's still important." That small moment, so ordinary on the surface, meant more than either of them said aloud. Later that day, as the shop grew quieter, Elena finally spoke the words she had been holding inside. "I've been thinking," she said softly. Daniel looked up from where he was sitting nearby. "About?" "Everything," she replied honestly. A pause followed. Then she added, "About what you said." "About me, about all of this." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened. Elena leaned lightly against the counter. "I don't understand why someone like you would choose someone like me," she admitted. Daniel's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. "Then let me ask you something," he said. Elena looked at him. "If I had never told you anything about my life," he said, "if I had walked in here as just another man, would you think this is impossible?" Elena hesitated because the honest answer was complicated. She finally said, "Maybe not impossible. Just, unexpected." Daniel nodded slightly. "That's fair." Another quiet moment passed. Then he continued. "The town sees you one way," he said, "but that's not who you are. And it's not who I see." Elena looked down for a moment, then back at him. "And who do you see?" she asked again, but this time her voice was steadier. Daniel didn't hesitate now. "I see someone who has been strong in silence," he said. "Someone who built a life without asking for permission. Someone who doesn't need to be rescued but deserves to be chosen." Elena absorbed his words slowly, not as fantasy, but as something unfamiliar and real. That evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light poured through the laundromat windows, Elena stood still for a long time after the last customer left. Daniel was still there, waiting, not pressing. Finally, Elena spoke. "I don't want to be someone's experiment," she said carefully. Daniel shook his head immediately. "You're not." I don't want to be a story people talk about, she added. You won't be, he replied. A pause, then Elena took a slow breath. I also don't want to stay exactly where I've always been, she admitted. That was the first time she had said it out loud. Daniel looked at her quietly. Not surprised. Just present. Elena stepped away from the counter, standing closer now not to him, but to the moment. I'm scared, she said honestly. Daniel nodded. So am I? That made her look up quickly. He gave a small, almost faint smile. Not of you, he clarified. Of doing something real after a long time of everything being fake. Silence settled again, but this time it felt lighter. Days later, the town noticed something different. Not gossip, not speculation, but change. Elena no longer looked like someone waiting for life to happen, and Daniel no longer looked like someone passing through. They stood side by side more. Often now not as a spectacle, but as two people slowly building understanding in a world that didn't expect it. And when the moment finally came, quiet, private, unannounced to the world, Elena gave her answer. Not because everything was certain, but because for the first time in her life, she felt seen without conditions. And Daniel Whitmore didn't just choose her. He chose a life built on something he had been searching for all along, truth.